sir. All right, so here's the deal. Mike thinks that he's the best dressed person in all of Bitcoin, and he has some great shoes on. My first question is, do you lay your outfit out the night before, or is this a game time decision in the morning?
You know, it's kind of like when I get on stage, I'm not sure what I'm going to say. I wake up and I just grab something.
All right. You worked at Fortress for a while, and Fortress seems to be a place where Bitcoin had an epicenter very early on. And a lot of the work that you guys did at Fortress was foreign currencies and other types of trading that would lend itself to understanding Bitcoin. Help people understand in the beginning, when you first saw this, you were talking about emerging market currencies, Bitcoin came along. How were you guys thinking about that, and why did it resonate so much with a Wall Street type audience that probably isn't really what Satoshi might have thought would be the first ones to see the value?
Listen, at its core, right, Bitcoin is a macro bet. It's a bet that populism was going to come. I mean, Satoshi was brilliant to understand in '09 that we were going to have this move towards populism. Populism always ends up debasing currencies. And so I'm a macro guy. I got a call from my partner who wasn't a macro guy, but I'd met Wences Casares. And for those of you who haven't seen Wences or met Wences, he's kind of patient zero for almost everyone I know in Bitcoin. And Wences had orange-pilled my partner who called me. I looked into Bitcoin pretty quick on the internet, never heard of it, and realized it's a really cool new technology. We were having an inflation scare. This was 2012, 2013. People were really worried about inflation back then. It turned out it didn't happen for 10 years. But in 2012, 13, you had QE2. And so I thought, you know, there are a lot of libertarians. There are a lot of people that want to live off the grid. People are worried about the world, right? We'd had the great financial crisis. So this was going to go up. And at Fortress, because we were kind of a real asset company, my partners and I all decided this would be on our PAs, private. We wouldn't talk about this publicly. And partly because I can't stop talking, I was at a small conference and someone asked me about frontier currencies, emerging market currencies. And I was like, BS with those things. If you want a real frontier currency, you got to buy Bitcoin. And that next day I was on the cover of the Financial Times. The only time I was on the cover of the Financial Times, about, you know, Fortress's Novogratz endorsing Bitcoin going to 1,000. And since then I've been asked to speak over and over. And so when you're on stage, you don't want to make a fool of yourself. And so that really forced me to dive in deep. And that's what really started the process.
So if we go from what really was, maybe this is insurance, maybe it's kind of the chaos hedge, maybe it's inflation hedge, whatever was the thought process in 2012, 2013, to today, we see major institutions starting to adopt it. We have public companies putting it on their balance sheet. We have a nation state that's purchasing Bitcoin. What is the kind of sentiment among the non-retail audience at the moment? Is it Bitcoin has transitioned from a contrarian trade to a consensus one? Is it an inflation hedge? Like, why is there so much more interest today than there was maybe even just 2 years ago?
Now, if you think about the genesis, right, of Bitcoin was that it came out of a breakdown in trust, right? I don't trust authority. I don't trust the central bank. I don't trust the government. I don't trust the bank. And ever since then, we've been in a bear market in trust. Just surf the internet, watch cable news, right? Look at the foreign minister of China who just said, hey, we're not sure we can trust the US dollar. If you're Russian, the dollar is no longer a risk-free asset. And so as we see trust break down, the intellectual case for Bitcoin makes more and more sense. The other piece that's, I think, you got to hold in context is it started off as an experiment. And it's a miracle in lots of ways. Bitcoin is probably the best brand ever created in the shortest amount of time. If you think about, we're 13 years old, we've got $1 trillion brand that everybody in the world knows. Like, that's hard to do, and it's done without a CEO. It's done by people in every country, in every village, telling the Bitcoin story. It's done by guys like you getting on your podcast and on TV, telling the Bitcoin story. And so the adoption cycle is starting to hit breakout velocity. And we can see that because sovereign wealth funds are buying it now. Institutions are buying it. They're buying it for the same reason that individuals bought it 6 years ago, 5 years ago. Half the people in the audience probably bought it. They see an increasing possibility that populism will debase their currencies. And so when I look at Russia or Turkey, where there was horrible stewardship of the financial economy, Bitcoin use goes up, right? You know, people have a God-given right, right? It should be a human right to store the fruits of their labor in something. And this is a really interesting way to store the fruits of your labor.
You mentioned sovereign wealth funds, and I think a lot of folks have been paying attention to what El Salvador is doing. There's plenty of rumors about other countries. Do you want to tell us which sovereign wealth funds or kind of what their thought process is?
Well, you know, El Salvador, I have mixed emotions in some ways, because what I think is important is the ethos of permissionless, right? That anybody can join, but I don't force you to join. What makes crypto in general, but Bitcoin specifically, so cool, it's now a nation state of 140 million people. That's the 8th largest country on earth. Think about that. And that's people from all over saying, I want to join. And so when you make it legal tender, you're forcing people to use it. That cuts against, I think, the ethos. I know people will disagree with me on that, and it's good for adoption, but I don't buy into that side. I am seeing sovereign wealth funds saying, hey, part of my reserves, right? It used to be the dollar and the euro and gold. You're going to see a new bucket of reserves across the world. The dollar will still be part of it, but it will be a lesser part of it. And it will be a hodgepodge of things. I'm sure crypto will be part of it. I'm sure Bitcoin will be part of it. And that's just starting. And it's mostly starting, and these guys wanted to get into mining. Mining is an easier way for people to think, because everyone thinks they're going to get in cheap.
When you think about mining, we've seen Exxon, we've seen ConocoPhillips all say, hey, look, we're doing some sort of pilot project. We're taking flared gas and we're going to go ahead and we're going to mine Bitcoin. There's obviously, in the Middle East specifically, very large energy production. Russia, Ukraine, there's a ton of energy production that comes out of there. Is this something where it's just a foregone conclusion that every major energy producer will mine Bitcoin as well, or what are you seeing on that front?
I think people that have excess power in their grid will look towards Bitcoin if the electricity is cheap enough. I do worry a little bit, and I fight back and forth. We have a big mining business at Galaxy. It's run by a woman, Amanda Fabiano, and I'm proud to say we're half women in our mining business because I love the idea of them in their hard hats. And we debate all the time where hash rate's going. I see a tremendous amount of money going into the mining space. You know, I've got a bar in Wyoming, and I run in there, and 2 of the guys are from Texas, and they're doing mining, and I'm like, really? And so I worry. I think it's great for the ecosystem. I worry about hash rate, but we'll see. She's been righter than I have so far.
You're worried that it's going to go up too fast?
I think there's a lot of money going into mining, and so hash rate could go a lot higher, faster. Again, the experts on my team say I'm wrong.
So basically the idea would be Bitcoin would be more secure, but
it's great for the Bitcoin ecosystem, right? It is certainly great for the Bitcoin ecosystem because it makes it more secure.
Yeah. One of the things that you've got a ton of experience is foreign currencies. If we go to somewhere like Lebanon, the central bank just announced, hey, basically we're bankrupt, and there's a lot of issues. And the stats that I saw yesterday were the currency's fallen 90% since 2019. There's been a contraction of the economy by 60% or so. When you look at that country, but could be any country that goes through a similar situation, are we now at a point where Bitcoin is big enough where they can actually turn and potentially either put it in their reserves, give it to citizens, or seek that as a potential safe haven or solution, or is it still too small?
It's getting there. Listen, traditionally, when countries had horrible stewardship and you've started having hyperinflations, people would find US dollars. They'd put them in their pillowcases, they'd hide them in their closets, right? We're moving to a digital world, and so you're going to see stable coins, dollar-backed, renminbi-backed, algorithmic. We can talk about the Terra stable coin in a little bit. as part of that, and you're going to see Bitcoin as part of that. It's interesting. You always ask yourself, if you're living somewhere and you have to put all your money into something, would it all go into Bitcoin? Would it go into Bitcoin plus dollars, right? The people in this room would be like, Bitcoin! But the broader population is still learning about Bitcoin. And so the first instinct would be, just get me into the dollar. And so I think stable coins are going to have a big part of the ecosystem for a long time.
You mentioned UST, which is the stablecoin in the Terra ecosystem, and most people in this room didn't know anything about it, frankly didn't care, probably thought it was a scam. And one of the creators, Do Kwon, recently announced that he was going to put $3 billion in the reserves.
10 billion.
Well, 10 billion over time, 3 billion initially. And there's one argument of, hey, if there's somebody with a persistent bid in the market, in a highly illiquid market, the price is going to go up. And so if you hold Bitcoin, you may be more sympathetic to Do Kwon than you were before this announcement. The other argument is he potentially, if successful, is creating a playbook, similar to what Michael Saylor did, creating a playbook for public companies to put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Is your thought process that Do Kwon is showing, whether it's the central bank, other stable coins, you can use Bitcoin as collateral for these, really just stable coin or digital tokens?
Listen, so to start with, I probably am the only guy in the world that's got both a Bitcoin tattoo and a Luna tattoo. I met Do, 3-4 years ago. He is a brilliant young man. And he had this idea of an algorithm, stablecoin, digital money for a digitally native world with no central bank, no ties, no dollars saved. And originally, his stablecoin was backed by Luna. And I think what he realized was Bitcoin is a much more stable asset. It's existed for 13 years. It's got 150 million people. And so if I can take Bitcoin and back my stablecoin algorithmically, it's just going to be a safer reserve. And so it's no different, quite frankly, than if Switzerland switched some of the reserves from dollars and euros to Bitcoin.
Yeah, so is he basically creating a playbook where others can follow?
I think you'll see that. Listen, this is a really interesting experiment. It's not without risk, right? He's in this transition. Right now, the plan is to buy $10 billion worth of Bitcoin, and as that ecosystem grows, that number would grow. That's all good, as long as there's not a run on the bank. And so we should all be open-minded. Like, he's got such good momentum. When I interviewed him for my podcast, I said, well, Joe, how smart were you? He said, well, I was pretty smart growing up. And I was like, well, how smart? He said, well, because he got into Stanford. You got to be pretty smart because he didn't look like an athlete. And he said, well, I took 15 AP courses and I got 5s on all of them. And I was like, geez, I took 1 and I got a 4. And so he's a very smart guy. And there's momentum on the side of this. There's always a tail risk there. And so it's an experiment we need to be watching. It's, I think, categorically good for Bitcoin at this point, right? You're seeing another use case being used as reserves. And remember, in markets, prices are always set on the margin. What do I mean by that? You hit an equilibrium and one guy buys and it's going to push the price up because there's not that many sellers. And so when you have someone buying $10 billion of Bitcoin, it's going to move the price.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin and politics. Obviously, there seems to be a sentiment change. First, it started on kind of the right side of the aisle. It looks now like a lot of Democrats also are becoming more pro-Bitcoin, pro-crypto. How important is it for a politician at this point to understand these technologies? And is it fair to say that over the next couple of years, if you're anti this technology, you're probably either going to get voted out or not elected?
So I think the most important week in lots of ways in crypto last year was around the infrastructure bill, when the Biden administration really tried to sneak in a poison pill, or at least a get you sick pill into that legislation. And the crypto community mobilized. I remember I was in the south of France on vacation, my only vacation I took, and I was on the phone with every senator I knew, but everyone was. More impressively, there was this retail groundswell. There were millions of phone calls placed to congressmen and senators, and DC was shocked. That was the wake-up call when they realized, this is a really powerful voting bloc, and it's often a single-issue voting bloc. Don't screw with my Bitcoin. Don't screw with my crypto. You know, Elizabeth Warren, who has got a lot of clout with the Biden administration, who is very close to the head of the SEC, had a lot of influence about how the Biden administration was thinking. And what is really interesting is Janet Yellen and the president's executive order really had a change in tone recently. It was a change in tone from being negative to being balanced. That's politics. That is not because they saw the light, it's because they like, wow, we need to pay attention. And there are two things that got them thinking, right? This is about innovation, right? And it's about the little guy. And so I think that narrative is changing in DC. I don't see legislation showing up this year the way politics are set up. We're going to be in a gridlock. But I think the chance of them doing really damaging things has gone way down.
When we start to think about politicians, I think a lot of it is they respond to the average citizen or people who have influence. And one of the things that's important around Bitcoin is the narrative, right? What is the narrative of the moment? And it brings in different groups of people based on what narrative is kind of popular at the moment. In America, we have 8% inflation, probably going higher when the March numbers come out. Is Bitcoin an inflation hedge? Is it a non-correlated asset? Is it a speculation tool? Like, what is the narrative that you think is kind of resonating with the market today?
So I would say Bitcoin is far more important outside of the US than it is inside the US. Right? The US dollar has been very stable against other currencies for a long period of time. And when you look at Lebanon or Russia or Turkey, they haven't been. And so, but every macro investor, every common citizen can look and see what we're spending and realize with debt to GDP at 140%, it's really hard to see solving that issue without inflating your way out. And now we're seeing 8% inflation. And so it's becoming part of a portfolio for institutions, part of a portfolio. And I think the narrative isn't that we're going to replace the dollar with Bitcoin. It's not that I'm going to buy these fancy shoes in Bitcoin. It's that I'm going to take some of my wealth and preserve it and store it there as an asset. Right now, it's still correlated to the NASDAQ. That correlation is starting to break down, right? It used to have a beta of 4, now it's got a beta of 2. Why is it correlated? Because most people bought risk assets and bought Bitcoin because the Fed was pumping in so much money. And so what drove prices up, inflation, is driving both NASDAQ, right? Stocks, believe it or not, are an inflation hedge, right? It's hard to remember, but stocks are an inflation hedge. If you have hyperinflation, stocks go way up because they're being repriced. And so there will continue to be a correlation. It'll break down some.
We've seen the Fed talk a tough game over the last couple of months. They finally raised interest rates 25 basis points in March. There's a lot of folks who are looking at the inverted yield curves, the raising of rates, and saying, hey, a recession is coming. One, agree, disagree, a recession is coming, and two, how do you expect Bitcoin to perform in a recessionary event?
So to start with, I think Bitcoin has traded amazingly well, given that in the last 5 weeks, rates are down 147 basis points. If you had told anybody in my seat who was a macro investor that you were going to have rates fall 147 basis points and Bitcoin would be up, they'd say not a snowball's chance in hell. And so there's something going on, right? We tested the lows in the 32, 33, and we held pretty well. And I think, will we take out 50? I don't know. I think so. But first of all, it's trading really well. I think Powell did realize, he was behind the curve. Part of the reason he was behind the curve is it was like a 9-month process for him to get reappointed. and he really wanted to get reappointed. People like to be in power. It's why, algorithmic trust sometimes is better than human trust. He had his reasons, right? He's a Republican. If he wasn't going to be the chairman, it was going to be Lael Brainerd. He was probably worried that Lael would be a lot more dovish than he would be. And so I think you're going to see the chairman be very hawkish for a while, right? He's a civil servant at his core, and he has a reputation, and he doesn't want to blast it. And so you're going to see the Fed be hawkish. Will the economy slow? You're already seeing signs of future slowing. But these things are hard, right? Like the American economy is tech and commodities. Commodity prices are going sky high, so that's pretty darn good for America, right? And tech is a little less correlated. And so we'll have an industrial recession maybe, but the economies are like super tankers. And so I think the jury is out on how quickly it slows. And so I think you're going to see the Fed raise rates 50 and then wait a little bit and then raise again. It's priced in the market. What's shocking is how well Bitcoin's traded. The moment the Fed pauses, I think Bitcoin, as my song says, goes to the moon.
If you haven't heard Mike sing a song, it's pretty good. Well, I want to spend the last couple of minutes. There's a lot of folks in the Bitcoin community who are watching this. You talk to all kinds of different people, politicians, entrepreneurs, other investors who are in Bitcoin, who are not in Bitcoin, and just various people in some of your philanthropic work, et cetera. What would your message be to whether it's a young person, an entrepreneur, or an investor in the space? Like, what are the things that need to happen, or what can they do to help push Bitcoin forward?
So when I first got into Bitcoin, I met with this guy, Alex Marcos. I don't know if you know Alex, he's a core developer. But before that, he was one of the greatest high-frequency traders there was, and he made a bunch of money. And he was the guy that gave every student at MIT 1 Bitcoin. And then he was donating money to this, and I was like, Alex, you're like a philanthropist for Bitcoin. And he looked at me with a wry grin. He's like, dude, you still don't get it. I was like, huh? He was like, I own a bunch of Bitcoin, so I want the community to be healthy. I want people to understand it. Like, it's in my vested interest to do good. That idea, the genius of Satoshi in lots of ways, or one of the geniuses, was you do well by doing good. Everybody in the Bitcoin community has a role to make this place better. My role, because I can't stop talking, has been to preach. If I could code, I promise I would try, but like I can barely type. And so you got to figure out what your role is. And so what I tell people is bring people into the tent. Or if you're a core developer, code away. Or if you love mining, work on Stratum 2. Like Galaxy, we hired someone full-time to work on Stratum 2 to make mining better. Figure out how you can contribute to make the community better. That's the ethos of Satoshi. It's the ethos of crypto.
All right, we got 2 minutes left, so we're gonna have fun now. I'm just gonna fire questions at you, and you tell us what you think. Don't hold anything back. How high is Bitcoin's price ever gonna go?
$1 million.
It will never go over $1 million?
What
are you guys clapping about? That's the most bearish person here.
Predicting prices is a really complicated thing. So I got myself to $500,000 because that's the market cap of gold, right? But the gold market cap could go up, and we're going to replace gold. And so in some ways, and this is going to maybe sound heretical to a Bitcoin crowd, I go to bed and I pray that the stewards of the US economy don't screw it up. Because I see what happens to societies when the stewards screw it up. I have Russian friends that have gone bankrupt in literally the last 6 weeks that had good livings, and they're gone, right? I've had Turkish friends that have seen their entire life savings blown. And so I really do pray that the dollar stays strong and Bitcoin doesn't go to infinity, because Bitcoin going to infinity means the rest of the Western world has really fallen apart and we lose social order. But I think we could get to $500,000 or even $1 million with stability in the West. And so for us to get a lot higher than that, it means stability of the West is gone.
You mentioned earlier that Bitcoin's more important outside the US. The president put forward the executive order saying that we want to be a leader in this technology. true or false, the United States becomes the leader in Bitcoin over the next decade?
You know, I think that executive order was more focused on stable coins, right? The US has a vested interest in keeping the dollar strong. And so getting the stablecoin solution right is of paramount importance to the country from a national security perspective. If you're American, you don't want African countries, Latin Americans, the Mideast using the Chinese stablecoin. China certainly wants that stablecoin used. You're going to see a monster effort by the Chinese to have the digital renminbi be the coin of commerce, right? If you're American, if you're the US government, you want it to be the dollar. And so the government cares a lot less about Bitcoin than they care about the dollar stablecoin.
Last question. The day you die, I obviously come to your funeral and I look at the message that's written on the tombstone. It says, Mike Novogratz, what?
While alive, he lived.
Fucking great. All right, I appreciate it. Have a great conference, everyone.
Thank you.